11 Warriors Live. I'm your host, Chase Brown. I'm usually joined by our editor, Dan Hope, and a reporter, Andy Anders. But today I'm joined by Jack Emerson, our associate producer. Jack and I go way back. I'm excited for this call with you, Jack. He and I graduated from Ohio State in the same year, 2022, right?
2022.
And then Jack was my editor at The Lantern, the Ohio State student newspaper. So we go way back and now work for the same company in 11 Warriors. And today's episode is full of great stuff I'm excited to talk about with you, Jack. But before we get there, I do have to mention that this morning I was downtown in Columbus for the nationwide marathon. And I'm watching these runners go, whether it be 13 miles or 26 miles or whatever those two things are, running in the rain, in the cold, in the wind. Jack, have you ever run in a marathon? Would you ever run in a marathon? Why or why not?
I have never run in a marathon, and I don't think I ever would. It kind of runs in my family, though. Like, my dad's run 2, I believe. My sisters run 4, and then my other sisters ran at least 1. So I'm kind of the black sheep in the family with that. I just don't
Yeah.
think I could keep myself entertained for 26 miles. I think there's so many podcasts you can listen to. There's so much music you can listen to. And also, I'm just like, I'm not in the right shape for it, you know? I don't think I could even go through the training regimen of doing it. It
Yeah.
sounds like way too much. But yeah, I don't ever envision myself running one, but who knows? People change, things change. So, but right now in my current state, no shot.
Well, on the training element, so I have a friend named Z. I don't know if he's listening. He's probably not, mostly because his body is probably in some sort of shock. He trained literally zero for this marathon today. He ran a full marathon, had maybe gone out for about 3 or 4 runs in the past couple of weeks. I think the most that he hit was about 8 miles. So multiply that by three and a little bit extra change is what he ran today, having not trained for it at all. I am very excited to get on the phone with him at some point or see him in person and just see how his body's doing, because I have to imagine that he is probably fallen over once he was done and is going to be sleeping for maybe the next 72 hours. But okay, that was just the marathon talk. Let's get into some Ohio State football stuff. Ohio State, the number one team in the nation, goes to Madison and beats Wisconsin 34-0. We are going to talk about Julian Sayin making a Heisman statement against the Badgers, Ohio State's defense continuing to look generational week after week, and give some input on what continues to be an entertaining and exciting season around the Big Ten. But before we get into that, let me read this message to you from our sponsor, First Bank of Central Ohio. It is the official bank of 11 Warriors. First Bank of Central Ohio is proud to support the business owners of Central Ohio. Locally owned, business focused, and always in your corner. First Bank of Ohio. Visit them at fbcentralohio.com. All right, Jack. Julian Sayin 36 of 42, 393 yards, 4 touchdowns. Is that good?
That sounds pretty good to me, Chase. That sounds
Sounds
pretty
pretty
good.
good. Julian Sayin had a performance that I honestly was watching it unfold and just was amazed with the confidence that he showed in the pocket, his accuracy both in short and long throws, mixing in some intermediate, of course, in between. But Julian Sayin continues to evolve in this offense. Have we seen Julian Sayin at his best, or does he still have room to grow? How would you assess his performance to this point in the season, and particularly on Saturday against the Badgers?
Yeah, I don't think we've seen him at his best. I think there's still a lot that he can unlock. And I was thinking about this earlier, actually. I was thinking, if you show somebody who has no knowledge of Julian Sayin his tape against Texas, where he obviously his first start, he's taking some cobwebs off, getting the gears going as a quarterback. They were very timid with him. He seemed a little timid in the pocket as well. If you show them that tape and then show them the tape from Saturday's game against Wisconsin, he's like a completely different quarterback. I think you're looking at, it looks like years of development in 6 short weeks. And I think there's so much more that he can build off of. And obviously he has 2 great weapons in Carnell and Jeremiah, and he has tremendous confidence in throwing to both of those guys. And then obviously guys like Max Clare, Brandon Ennis had a few nice catches in this game. I think we're just seeing him scratch the surface right now. And I think as the season continues and he gets some favorable matchups against teams like Purdue and UCLA, even though they've kind of righted the ship a little bit there, I think we're just going to see even more out of Julian Sayin. And I'm thrilled to kind of see his development as the season continues.
It was interesting coming into this weekend that despite leading the nation in 78.4 completion percentage and ranking somewhere around the top of the nation in his passer rating, that Sayin seemed to be overshadowed in some of the Heisman Trophy conversation during the first half of the season. Obviously there was Alabama's Ty Simpson, him bouncing back from his performance against Florida State to really be shining in his role now for the Crimson Tide. You had Miami's Carson Beck, obviously on Friday night. You now can probably throw his name out from that conversation with 4 interceptions against Louisville in a loss to Louisville. And then you also have Indiana's Fernando Mendoza, and then Oregon's Dante Moore is probably still in the conversation, but he has some work to do to get back into it. But when Sayin comes into this game against Wisconsin, he completes, again, 36 of 42 passes for a career high 393 yards in 4 scores. You had Carnell Tate after the game with a pretty great quote. He said that Julian Sayin is the truth. He's the Heisman winner. He said, ain't no questions, ifs, ands, or doubts. Each and every week he goes out there to prove to us why he's a Heisman winner. According to FanDuel and DraftKings, Sayin has the 3rd best odds behind Fernando Mendoza and Ty Simpson. But do we have a legitimate Heisman contender that we're watching week after week for Ohio State? Do you think that Julian Sayin, if he continues to build on this performance, can be the player that hoists the Stiff Arm Trophy at the end of the season, Jack?
Definitely. I think you look at the thing that jumps out to me the most is obviously his completion percentage. 80% through 7 games is just unheard of. And I think you're just seeing him operate in this offense with such efficiency and such confidence. If he continues to play this way, I don't see how you can keep him out of New York and how you can keep him out of that conversation. Mendoza has been phenomenal, and I think he deserves a lot of praise. The same with Simpson. Another guy is Pavia from Vanderbilt, just with how they've kind of gone through this season, and now he's played in big moments, especially yesterday against LSU. But the way Sayin has been playing, I don't see why there's any reason why he can't win the Heisman Trophy this year.
It's interesting that Julian Sayin is the quarterback of this team. And also coming into this game, while he wasn't mentioned as part of that Heisman conversation, I think one of those reasons was because Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate are so good at the wide receiver position. And so I think people will look at Julian Sayin and say, well, of course he's performing at this rate. He has the 2 best wide receivers in the country. Anybody could be behind center for Ohio State and complete the ball in the way that he is doing and throw for the number of yards and throw for the number of touchdowns. But I would ask anyone that's making that argument to put on some of this tape from the Wisconsin game, because he was delivering strike after strike. The first one to Carnell Tate, exceptional play from Carnell Tate in the back of the end zone. He jumps over 2 defenders. He loses his helmet. He comes down with the ball. But there's something to be said about the way that Julian Sayin placed that ball specifically for his talented receiver to make the catch and score the touchdown. I think about a few more catches or a few more throws that Julian Sayin had specifically to Carnell Tate, those toe tappers on the sideline that we continue to see week after week from Tate, or even the Brandon Ennis touchdown at the end of the game where Julian Sayin is extending the play. He's scanning at the back of the end zone, running to his right, and throws a ball on a rope. Or as my friends will say, they always quote Dr. Evil, and they say he's throwing a freaking laser beam. That's the way that it seems Julian Sayin is throwing the football right now. And it seems like he's just getting more and more comfortable. And Ryan Day even said after the game in a post-game interview with CBS that they really tried to put a lot on Julian's plate and let him push the ball down the field. Day said that he thought Sayin made really good decisions. He thought there were some really good catches out there as well from Ohio State's wide receivers. So to our conversation or to our points earlier, it seems like Sayin is going to be handed more and more responsibility week after week. And that if you're seeing this right now against a Wisconsin team that, yes, their season's going down the drain, but they still have a decent defense. And it seems like they provided some challenge for Ohio State, particularly against the run. But it seemed also that Sayin was able to deliver a great performance from start to finish. Let me ask you this question that that Carnell Tate was asked on on Saturday. He was asked about Julian Sayin's performance and his consistency. And when Julian Sayin arrived at Ohio State, uh, Carnell Tate had said that he immediately recognized that Sayin was special. Were we kind of silly to think that Lincoln Kienholz was a part of this quarterback competition coming into the year? Or was that really just kind of Ryan Day trying to sell us on a competition and keeping both guys engaged for the entire preseason? Because it's not to any fault of Lincoln Kienholz, but Sayin just looks like the guy and probably was clearly the guy all along.
Yeah, I think that's Ryan Day just being a coach there and just trying to keep his guys engaged and kind of keep us on our toes. It probably was a ploy to throw Texas off a little bit too, being like, well, we don't know who our guy is yet. We don't know who we're going to throw out there.
Right.
But for the most part, I think Sayin came in. Obviously, he was a highly touted recruit. When you commit to Nick Saban, you're obviously a guy that's worth taking a look at. So I think they brought in Julian Sayin to start at his first opportunity to start. But you never know. It's not a bad thing to create competition and see kind of what you have in other guys in the room. But for the most part, I think that was just Ryan Day, playing the coach game, trying to just keep his guys engaged, and competition breeds excellence, like they say. So it's just another way to get more out of guys in practice too.
Okay, so we've been talking now for almost 12 minutes, kind of similar to a comment Ryan Day made in his post-game press conference. He had been sitting there at the podium talking to Ohio State reporters for about 15 minutes when he said that, why isn't anybody asking me about the defense, right? We just shut out a team in Wisconsin in their place. He wanted to talk about the defense. And so this Ohio State defense, we've talked about it all year being generational. And it seems like that's a term that people throw around a lot these days. But truly, when you are talking about the Ohio State defense, that's really the only word that you can use. CBS Sports had one of the better stats to prove that point, that Ohio State, through 7 games, has only allowed 41 total points. That is the fewest points allowed by an FBS team through 7 games since 2000. It's 5.86 a game that Ohio State is allowing. Now, okay, we have Texas as the season opener. They came in as the number 1 team in the nation. There was a lot of expectations for them. Then they go on to play Grambling and Ohio. They play a really talented Washington team, which we'll talk about a little bit about later when we get to the Big Ten scores. But then they move on to play Minnesota. They play Illinois. They play Wisconsin. None of those teams have particularly shined on offense outside of Washington this season, and Illinois to some extent. But it doesn't seem to really matter to me. If I were to put this Ohio State defense up against one of the more talented offenses in the nation, Alabama, Georgia, Ole Miss, rattling off a few more, this Ohio State defense just proves week after week that they are the best in the nation and perhaps one of the best that we've seen in a long time. Would you agree with that assessment, or do we think we still need to maybe see a little bit more from this Ohio State defense to make that kind of take?
I agree with that assessment. I think through 7 games, this might be pound for pound the best defense I've seen watching college football, and maybe even, looking at any level of football. I just think you're watching a defense that is so connected. I think they have 2 really heady individuals, really smart individuals in Caleb Downs and Arbel Reese that are kind of running the show and keeping guys together. And all of these guys follow them right into war. I think what you're seeing out of Matt Patricia and kind of the ways that he's been disguising coverages and bringing, pro level concepts to college football and just seeing how that's working out is fantastic. And I haven't seen a defense play at this level for this long, maybe ever. But, like you mentioned, there is some left to be desired with kind of who they've played. But they shut down Washington, like you mentioned. They shut down Illinois, who's been up and down on offense. But for the most part, I think what you're seeing from the tape, I think you carry over kind of the way that they're playing to some of those teams, like you mentioned, like Alabama, Georgia, some of those other teams that have shown flashes on offense. I think it holds up. I think it'll hold up against kind of any offense in the country.
Yeah, and you had mentioned those two guys, I think clearly are Ohio State's two best defenders, but that doesn't even include Sonny Styles,
Right.
right? Who's the guy that is a team captain. He's the Block O winner. He's the guy that wears the green dot. Um, those are three guys that you have on your defense that are able to communicate and get people set. I think when we've talked about Ohio State's defense over the years, one thing that Ryan Day always goes back to is when Ohio State's defense is set, they are solid. But when they are kind of scrambling and maybe aren't quite prepared for what the other team is going to throw at them with speed, whether they're going tempo, whether they just have something schemed up, um, that was kind of an issue the past 3 seasons at times under Jim Knowles. But what Matt Patricia has unlocked for these guys is just a deeper understanding of the game. And when you have those three players at the forefront, in addition to guys that are relentless in their effort, like Caden Curry, Caden McDonald, Davison Igbinosun, Jermaine Matthews Jr. I mean, you could really name anyone on the defense. I don't mean to leave anybody off there, but there is a confidence that they play with because they know what they're supposed to do, where they're supposed to be, and they know exactly how the defense should be prepared for whatever the offense throws at them. Caden Curry talked a little bit about that after the game. He said that every week we're trying to ball out, of course, trying to cause havoc on defense because everyone wants to make plays, he said. We want to get good field position for our offense, and kind of just growing that habit now is definitely going to help us later down the road. As we look down the road, though, and you hinted at it a little bit, Ohio State really doesn't have too many threats. Potentially, looking down further the schedule, the best offense that they'll face in the next 4 weeks, not including the bye, is going to be UCLA, which is crazy to say. Like you have Penn State as coming out of this bye, then you have Purdue, UCLA, and Rutgers. And then they have, of course, the road game at Michigan to end the season. Do we expect any of the next four teams to really challenge this Ohio State defense? Or is it all kind of just Ohio State using these next four opponents to prepare for the really big test, which is going to be Michigan at the end of the year?
I think it's probably the latter. I think there just isn't a whole lot of high level offenses on this schedule going forward, like you mentioned. I think UCLA, what they've done, just kind of their midseason flip with Jerry Neuheisel. I'm going to butcher his name, but Jerry Neuheisel calling the plays there. I think you're seeing an offense that's playing a lot more confident. Last night they kind of hit a snag early, but then got it together late in the game against Maryland. I think they'll be kind of a challenge. I think they'll, like you mentioned, I think they'll be the best challenge. But then you look at Rutgers, Purdue, kind of some of those teams, and it's like you'd be upset if they gave up double digits. I feel like it's one of those games where it's like yesterday, where with Wisconsin, where it's like if they had scored 13 points, you're kind of looking at it like, I mean, it's a great defensive performance on paper, but at the standard that this defense is at, that would have been something that you may have been upset about. And it's funny, that's the kind of the classic Ohio State fan thing where it's like, oh, we gave up 13 points. That's tough. But for the most part, I think you're looking at going forward, just seeing how this defense continues to evolve against this competition. And then, seeing how they can apply it to, when they play some better offenses later down the line in the playoffs and probably in the Big Ten championship as well, if they get there.
Yeah. And I think Matt Patricia would love if all of the next four opponents played the system that they're supposed to play. There's always the games Ohio State will play against Purdue and Northwestern, maybe even Rutgers to some extent, where they try and throw some sort of curveball into their offense just to try and get an advantage on this Ohio State defense. I think particularly a few years ago, the 2023 season opener, Indiana, they came out in a triple option offense. And it was like, if you're the defensive coordinator, if you're Jim Knowles there, you're like, are you serious? Like, we've been preparing for you guys to play a specific scheme, one that translates well to all the other opponents that we're going to play later down the road. And you come out in a triple option offense, which doesn't really help us prepare for our opponents down the stretch. I think if you're Matt Patricia, you would love to see all of these offenses perform to what their standard has been, and then continue to give Ohio State looks. I do think that there is some intrigue, of course, to that UCLA game Rutgers, just with Greg Schiano, you always have to expect a little bit of craziness. But really, the biggest game still left on this schedule is, of course, Michigan at the end of the year. Again, we'll talk a little bit about them in a second. But I want to ask you one question real quick. Jeremiah Smith came out after the game in an interview with CBS Sports. He said that this year's Ohio State team is better than last year's team. Do you agree with that? Do we need more info on this team to make that kind of take? Or have we already seen the 2025 Buckeyes surpass the 2024 Buckeyes?
I don't think we can say the 2025 Buckeyes have surpassed the 2024 Buckeyes until we see them raise that national championship trophy. I see where Jeremiah is coming from. I think they're stacked with talent. The defense is flying all over. And then on offense, you obviously have, all that talent with Sayin, Jeremiah, Carnell. If you put them on a field, classic SEC saying, if you throw them on a neutral site, who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows? But
who's favored? The Buckeyes or the Buckeyes?
Or the Buckeyes. Who knows? But I can't make those kinds of comparisons until we see them hoisting the national championship trophy. I think it's just one of those things where you don't want to lose yourself in those kind of comparisons either. We're only 7 games in. There's still however many games to go as well. So that's a tough one. I think you look at it talent-wise and you can maybe make an assessment, but I'm not ready to make one until they show that they can go the distance that the 2024 team did.
On a past episode of 11 Warriors Live, I had mentioned to Dan and Andy when we had first kind of had the conversation about whether Ohio State's defense is generational, that in the first episode of Downs to Business with Caleb Downs and Josh Downs, Caleb had said that Matt Patricia coming into Ohio State had made, at that point, before Ohio State had even played a game, he had made Ohio State's defense better than it was a year ago. And I was hesitant to trust in Caleb Downs' confidence at the time. That makes me inclined to trust in Jeremiah Smith's confidence here, that the 2025 Buckeyes are better than last year's team. However, my logical brain is telling me, as you just mentioned, that I can't confidently make that assertion until I've seen this Ohio State team win the national championship. I understand that last year's Ohio State team lost to Oregon. They lost to Michigan, of course, before going on that run to beat Tennessee and Oregon and Texas and Notre Dame in the national championship. We could see Ohio State navigate this regular season unscathed, right? It's very likely that this team will be 11-0 when they play in Ann Arbor at the end of November. That's been the case several times in the past few seasons for the Buckeyes. But as it stands, until you see Ryan Day hoisting what would be his second consecutive CFP trophy, it's really hard to make that leap. The statistics back up Jeremiah Smith's claim. Last year, Ohio State had the number 14 scoring offense and the number 28 total offense. They averaged 35.7 points a game, and they averaged 430 yards per game on offense. They also had the number 1 scoring defense at 13 points allowed, and number 1 total defense at 255 yards allowed. This season, through 7 games, Ohio State is a little bit better. They're averaging a little bit more than 36 points while accumulating about 430 yards. And then, of course, we mentioned earlier, Ohio State is allowing a ridiculous 5.86 points per game, 217 yards per game on defense. That's a lot of numbers, but basically the too long didn't read version is that the 2025 Buckeyes are better than the 2024 Buckeyes statistically. But that is, if my math is mathing, Ohio State's last year's team had 8 more games in their sample size against a lot more talented opponents. So if Ohio State can maintain their current production against the rest of their regular season opponents and then making a deeper run into the CFP, maybe we can use that as an argument for comparing those two teams. But I do think that it's probably wise, as you have mentioned, to kind of wait on that and kind of pull back a little bit and look at it from the perspective of last year's team won a national championship. There's only been 3 Ohio State teams to do that this century. It makes them pretty rare. And it would be even more rare for Ohio State to go back to back. if they were to win the national championship this year. You had kind of said this, but I am curious. If you're Ryan Day, do you want Jeremiah Smith saying this 7 games into the year? I think it's one thing to think it, but maybe putting something out like that's not in your best interest if you're the head coach. He talks a lot about keeping the noise outside the program, keeping distractions outside. Could this be one of them for the Buckeyes?
Um, I don't know. I mean, you're always happy when your guys are confident and your guys are, confident in their team, confident in their teammates, and just confident in what you have built to get to this point. But on the other side, there is that whole bulletin board material type thing where it's, you don't want to give other teams ammo. You don't want to give other, when you go on the road, you don't want to give other student sections ammo to attack you with. But for the most part, I think you look at it from a level of, hey, my guys are extremely confident in what we have here. I don't see any issue in him saying it, but at the same time, you don't want it to be a thing where it's like, oh, we're better than, you go into a game against Purdue and it's, oh, we're better than Purdue. We're better than last year's team that just won a national championship. You don't want that mindset to breed complacency, but I don't see that being a thing. Ryan Day throughout his time here hasn't allowed that to be a thing. And I don't see it becoming a thing going forward. But for the most part, I think you're happy that your guys are confident in what's been built.
It seems like this Ohio State team is maybe the only Big Ten team. I should pause and say Indiana has played really well this season and continues to look really good. But it seems like Ohio State and Indiana, maybe Oregon, are kind of the only Big Ten teams this season that are navigating it with the proper mindset moving forward, without any sort of interruptions in their plans and moving toward a Big Ten title and a college football playoff spot. Because every week the Big Ten continues to surprise with its results. On Friday night, let's start here. Where on Friday night, Matt Rule, potential future Penn State coach Matt Rule, in his audition potentially for becoming the Nittany Lions program leader, goes to Minnesota and his Nebraska Cornhuskers fall flat 24-6. The memes on Friday night and going into Saturday were killing me. That Matt Rule, he had confidently denied that he did not want the Penn State job, and that this was his proper audition, was saying, you know what, I'm so sure that I don't want it, that I'm just going to go ahead and lose to Minnesota 24-6. Dylan Raiola was sacked 9 times in this game. Nebraska was the number 25 team in the country coming in. They'll certainly be knocked out of the top 25 following this loss. But they are a middle of the pack Big Ten team that kind of squandered maybe its opportunity to continue establishing itself at the top tier of the conference. Let's go to Indiana with a 38-13 win over Michigan State. It started out a little bit slow. Indiana was actually trailing in this game 10-7 before they ended up putting the beating down on the Spartans. Indiana is the number 3 team in the country now. When the polls come out in a little bit, they'll probably be number 2.
Crazy.
What do you make of the job that Curt Cignetti has done this season and continues to do for the Hoosiers this year?
I think he's done obviously a tremendous job. I mean, that program obviously has been kind of a perennial loser in its entire history. And then they bring in Cignetti, and all of a sudden they're probably one of the 5 best teams in college football back-to-back years. Maybe not top 5 last year, top 10 at least, in back-to-back years. It just is, the results show just kind of the job that he's done there. I think the big thing you see is how savvy he is in the transfer portal. Obviously, this team getting Mendoza, Roman Hemby from Maryland, and a few other guys, he has done a terrific job. And I think obviously Indiana has recognized that. They gave him that big extension earlier this week, kind of warding off those rumors that he would leave for Penn State. I never thought he would, but that was a really good move by Indiana administration to kind of lock him in and keep him in Bloomington for the foreseeable future. I've got a couple of buddies who went to Indiana. They're thrilled because when they were there, Indiana was, they had the Tom Allen year, so they were okay, but they're thrilled now. They're a real contender. I think obviously the number 2 team in the country. I think they're a legitimate contender to really make some noise in the playoffs, and who knows going forward.
The Oregon win was big, and I know that people will kind of excuse Oregon and maybe its potential for being a Big Ten and national championship contender, because really their best win at this point is Penn State, who has now completely gone off the rails. But I trust that Dan Lanning will have his team prepared week after week. I also trust that Dante Moore is going to have better performances than he did against Indiana a week ago. And he did in a performance against Rutgers. Oregon traveled across the country, literally going coast to coast, to beat Rutgers 56-10. And Dante Moore in that game had 15 to 20, passing for 290 yards, 4 scores, and an interception. And then also Oregon did some damage rushing the ball. My goodness, they did some damage rushing the ball. 36 carries, 415 yards, and 4 scores. So Oregon is not a team that's going anywhere, I wouldn't say. And all it takes really is for one team to slip up in the Big Ten, potentially once, potentially twice, and Oregon will have its chance at a Big Ten title bid. And it is Oregon's a team that will continue to face opponents that they should steamroll the rest of the way. They have Wisconsin. They have a game at Kinnick, which should be interesting. But then they get Minnesota, a USC team at home, and a game at Washington. I would expect Oregon to fare well in each of those games. The USC one is interesting, but I didn't think that USC looked particularly great in their game against Notre Dame on Saturday night. I know that there was some weather that was kind of impacting the game script for that one, but Lincoln Riley, he had I think it was a 7 to 10 point lead late in the fourth or going into the fourth quarter, and then Notre Dame scored somewhere between 14 and 17 unanswered to win that game. So they, like Nebraska, had their opportunity to establish themselves in that upper tier of the Big Ten, but kind of squandered their chance a little bit. We have also on our score, and something that will be of interest to Ohio State fans is the Washington and Michigan final. This game was kind of interesting to me, Jack. Like, Michigan seemingly didn't want to run away from Washington at any point until Damon Williams Jr. started turning the ball over in consecutive possessions, which is something that he has not shown the propensity to do this regular season. I believe he entered into the game having thrown only 1 interception on around 190 pass attempts, and then Michigan made him throw 3 interceptions in the next 6 attempts. Michigan ends up winning 24-7. Michigan's now 5-2. How do we view the Wolverines in the rest of their season? Do we think that they will be 9-2 when they face Ohio State at the end of the year? They have a game at Michigan State, at home against Purdue, at Northwestern, and at Maryland before they face the Buckeyes.
I think they are a fine team, but a very flawed team. I do expect them to be 9-2 just based off kind of the schedule they have going forward. I don't really see any of those teams giving them much of a challenge. I could see them playing in some tight games, but ultimately pulling it out. But they're a flawed team. I think their defense is very good. I think you have a quarterback in Bryce Underwood who is obviously incredibly talented, but I think you see him make a little too many freshman mistakes, and I think that's kind of doomed them a little bit. They have a really good running game. Obviously, Justice Haynes is one of the top backs in the country. But based on kind of the schedule and what they have going forward, I could see them being 9-2 going into the game. But I don't know. I am not sure Sharon Moore is the right guy for the job there. I just think there's some questions about kind of how his scheme. I think he's kind of a rah-rah guy and less of a technician. But for the most part, I would be shocked if Michigan wasn't 9-2 going into that game. And I think they're obviously a better team than last year, but I still think they have a lot of flaws that kind of have prevented them from reemerging in that upper echelon of Big Ten teams.
To your point about Bryce Underwood, the one thing that I have seen, it was something Joel Klatt pointed out on Saturday, and I'm glad he did. He only has a fastball when he throws the football. It doesn't have a ton of touch, which is not something maybe that you should expect from a true freshman starting and the kind of player that he is. He did end up completing 21 to 27 attempts in this game for 230 yards and 2 scores. Jordan Marshall filled in really well in Justice Haynes' absence. He had 25 carries, 133 yards and a score. But but I do think that this Michigan team, for its flaws, seemingly finds a way to overcome them just when they need to. It didn't happen last week against USC. We know the strength of Oklahoma. They lost that game in Norman 24-13. But it seems like they are able to lean on their defense a little bit like Ohio State, but they don't have the explosive weapons that Ohio State does. And it does seem like Bryce Underwood, they're looking for the kind of development in him in a similar way that Ohio State is looking for the development in Julian Sayin. I'm by no means comparing them as players, but they're trying to put more on Underwood's plate. And I'm curious, at what rate will they do that, and how well will Bryce Underwood respond when they continue to give him more responsibilities? Because Michigan State's not having a great season, but that Michigan State game is always one that's going to be close. And I'm very interested to see how this upcoming weekend he performs in East Lansing in a game that's going to kick off at 7:30 on NBC. It is not going to be an easy environment for him to step into. It honestly might even be a little bit more challenging because Michigan State's season hasn't gone the way that it wanted it to. Getting a win over Michigan at home could be the marquee win that they need this season, the one that they will reflect upon as making it a successful one. So I am very curious to see how Bryce Underwood continues to evolve as the Wolverines quarterback. The last Big Ten score we can get to is what happened between Penn State and Iowa. This game was kind of an unexpected banger a little bit. They had a lot of back and forth that I wasn't expecting to see. Penn State scored a touchdown in each of the first 3 frames, while Iowa, being Iowa, relied pretty heavily on its special teams all throughout the entire game. Iowa ends up squeaking out the win 25-24. It's clear that there's going to be a drop-off between Drew Aller and Ethan Grunkemeyer, who I will say is a local guy. He played at Olentangy High School, Lewis Center. I am rooting for him, but it's tough to make your first start as a quarterback at Kinnick Stadium under the lights. And he definitely looked like someone who's going to need more experience before he really shines as a quarterback. He completed 15 to 28 passes for just 93 yards and 2 interceptions. Penn State relied pretty heavily on its run game to provide any offensive momentum. Katron Allen had 28 carries for 145 yards and 2 scores in this game. I was a little bit shocked about Nick Singleton's production. I will admit I don't know if he's dealing with any sort of ailment or injury. I don't think he is, but he only had 6 carries for 15 yards in this game, which he was a guy that was touted as a preseason All Big Ten, preseason All-American caliber player. And for him to have that kind of share with Katron Allen really surprised me. But this is now Penn State's 4th consecutive loss after starting the season 3-0. They will eventually come to play Ohio State. They'll play Indiana. It just really isn't looking great for the rest of Penn State's season. Terry Smith is their interim coach. I know that he kind of advocated for himself to, be one of the people that Penn State will interview and potentially add as its next head coach. But it is unfortunate that he comes out flat in his first performance. I'm not really sure if he was going to be a legitimate candidate anyway, but you never know with those kinds of coaching changes, the way that it maybe provided some juice for UCLA and Jerry Neuheisel. It didn't end up doing the same for Penn State here. The rest of the season for the Nittany Lions, I mentioned that they have the games against the Buckeyes and the Hoosiers. What do we see for this team? They were a national championship contender coming into the year. They are now 3-4. Do they win another game? If they do, are we looking at a 4-8 Penn State, a 5-7 Penn State? I think they've probably played their way out of a bowl game, is at least what I can confidently say right now. But I'm not sure where we end up seeing this Penn State team at the end of the year.
It's hard to say because of just, you lose a game to a winless UCLA team at the time, obviously, and then you turn around and you lose to Northwestern as well, who has been better than I think most expected, but still a team that you have to beat at home if you're Penn State. It almost feels like that Oregon game broke them. It was a point where it was kind of an inflection point for that program, where it was like, we have national championship expectations. I don't know if they ever necessarily had those national championship. This is the national championship front runner expectations in the James Franklin era until kind of week 1 of this year. And they just fell flat on their face. It happens, it's happened in the past, but I don't know where they go going forward. I think, like you mentioned, it's they have to play at Ohio State. They have to play Indiana, to obviously the number 1 and the number 2 teams in the country. And then, it's hard to see them getting over the hump against even some of their lesser opponents just because of, that UCLA game. And you can say, hey, UCLA has turned the corner, but I think a lot of that's based off of the confidence that they built by beating Penn State. And then the Northwestern game as well. It's tough when you're losing these games in that kind of fashion. I think that's 2 straight losses where they've lost by 1 point. So it's tough. I definitely agree that they've played themselves out of a bowl game. Maybe they can pick up a win against some of their lesser opponents going forward, but I don't see them really making any noise. And it's kind of one of those situations where you're just kind of trying to run the clock out and run the season out and just regroup in December and kind of go forward from there.
I want to get to some fan questions. Before I do that, though, I just thinking about Penn State not making a bowl game. I would imagine in the time that Ryan Day has talked about how great bowl practices can be for a program, it could be detrimental for Penn State to not make a bowl game this year, because then you are opening up the transfer portal, which is already open for those players if they wanted to enter, I believe. It's still, I have to look at what the NCAA's new rulings are, but I do know that there is an opening whenever there is a head coach firing. How long that opening is, I'm not sure. But what you're going to see is Penn State players are going to be sitting around on their couches for an entire month before the transfer portal opens at the start of January. You need something to fill their time. You need something to keep them away from those distractions, because sooner or later that program's going to get picked apart for any pieces that it's going to have left. They do have a lot of guys that return this season with that experience and with that desire to win a national championship. So how many crucial pieces are left over once those guys depart for the NFL draft or they graduate or whatever it may be, that's still to be determined. But it does seem like it's something where Penn State needs to do the best that it possibly can to push for a bowl game. Otherwise, that program is going to look unrecognizable next season in terms of its talent. You're already seeing a lot of their recruits that have committed then decommit, and they're not going to sign with the Nittany Lions given their coaching change. But let's move to some fan questions. Jack, we got a lot of questions in our forum about Ohio State kickers. A couple of questions. One, is there a reason why Ryan Day cannot find kickers? It seems like the kicking game just keeps getting worse. I'll combine that with another one, which says, when is Day going to finally address the kicking and punting game by actually trying to recruit talent in this area? Special teams recruiting has been ignored under his watch, and he needs to do something about it this offseason. We can't just give the issue lip service. This issue is not going to solve itself, and you aren't going to will the problem to get better by saying we need to do a better job. Ohio State's kicking game, punting game has not impressed me at all this year. What's your take on Ohio State's special teams and the way that it's performed through 7 games?
I feel the exact same way. I think special teams has been probably the biggest blind spot for Ryan Day since he took over as head coach at Ohio State. I don't remember the last time that I saw a kicker line up for a kick of 45 plus yards at Ohio State and been like confident that they were going to make it. I think it's been quite some time that where you see a kicker line up from 45 plus and you're like, oh, this sure-footed guy, he's going to make this kick. I haven't felt that way in 7 or 8 years, maybe. So it's obviously been a blind spot, and I think it's the same thing in the punting game. I just think there's a lot left to be desired. And I know we went through the whole thing with a special teams coordinator with Parker Fleming, and then I'm kind of just trying to piecemeal it with different coaches nowadays. So it's one of those things where it's just been a blind spot. I think he just feels like that they have what they need to win, but is ignoring kind of really one of the more important aspects of football. And I think it's funny when you go from a guy like Jim Tressel, who specialized in special teams, made it such a point to be great in that area. And then obviously Urban was kind of carried that tradition on as well. I don't think Ryan Day is ignoring it completely, but I think there is something to say about kind of how he's approaching it. And I think they really do need to find a kicker that you can really trust. I haven't quite felt that way in some time.
Well, Jaden Fielding's been Ohio State's kicker since 2023. So he's now in his third season as Ohio State's kicker. Not sure if these stats are quite up to date given yesterday's game, but here's what Sports Reference has as his field goal percentage in his 2.5 years as kicker. It's 79%, 37 makes on 47 attempts. Noah Ruggles was very accurate as a kicker. He was 37 of 41 for 90%. But as you mentioned, Georgia game as being the peak example, with him going out there for a 50-yard attempt and it having no chance to go into the uprights. Then there's you have Blake Haubill, who is Ohio State's kicker. He had attempts from 2017 to 2020. He made 80% of his kicks. Sean Nurenberger was the guy before him, making 72% of his kicks, 36 of 50. Tyler Durbin, 17 of 22, 77%. Obviously, you can go back much further. I remember the days of Devin Barkley and Aaron Petrie and, Ryan Pretorius. Going to name a guy competition with Ohio State's kickers. Mike Nugent being probably the most prominent of Ohio State's former kickers. But yeah, it has been some time since I have felt confidence in an Ohio State kicker going out there and attempting anything longer than 45 yards, certainly not from 50. They've given Fielding the chance to convert from those, and he hasn't quite taken advantage of those opportunities. As for how Ohio State can address recruiting in these areas, I'm honestly not sure. The kicking and punting recruiting is an industry that fascinates me because, to my knowledge, as being someone that had friends who were punters and kickers who were recruited out of high school, it's kind of one of those things where if you pay to be at enough camps, you'll get the rating that you want. And then you have to deliver every once in a while on your high school football stage on a Friday night. So it is hard to distinguish which kickers will pan out and which ones won't. My advice to Ohio State, particularly in the kicking and punting game, would be to find a guy who's proven himself at the collegiate level. I wouldn't be too concerned with signing any of those kinds of specialist positions out of high school anymore. If you're able to find a guy who kicks for Miami of Ohio or Bowling Green or Ball State or anything like that, Jackson Corville, I think, actually came from Ball State. If you're able to find a guy like that who comes from a group of 5 program and has established himself with accuracy and power in both areas, I think that's probably your best interest for Ohio State moving forward. Let's go to a question about Ohio State and its use of the tight ends. With all of the use of 2 and 3 tight ends, we seem to have one heck of a hard time running the ball, says one NFL Buck. Claire just seems to miss way too many blocks. I know everyone seems to love the versatility of the 2 and 3 tight end offense, but we seem to be drawing many defenders in the box and missing way too many blocks with the tight ends. Why take first round choices for players off the field who just aren't performing? What are your thoughts on Ohio State's run game and their use of some of these schemes or personnel units so far, Jack?
Yeah, I think obviously that kind of thing, it depends on down and distance. It depends on just situational football. When you're putting out, the 12 and 13 personnel kind of style offenses. I would agree. I feel like they're not generating the level of push that you would like to see when you're in those formations, especially down on the goal line. I don't want to go back to the Texas game because that's, it's week 1. It's a game where you're kind of just shaking off the cobwebs. It's just kind of irrelevant when you're in week 8. But one goal, and we ended up scoring on this drive, or Ohio State ended up scoring on this drive. One drive that really sticks in my mind is when they had the ball. I think they had first and goal at the 2, and they ran 4 straight plays with CJ Donaldson, pretty much right up the middle, just hoping they could generate enough push. And it took them 4 attempts to go 2 yards. Obviously, Texas is an incredibly stout defensive front, but that's one that has stuck in my mind since, for 8 weeks now.
Yeah.
It's one of those things, and you kind of seen it time and time again. Wisconsin had a stop in a short yardage situation yesterday. They might have had a couple, if I'm remembering correctly. It's just one of those things where I understand you can't throw the ball every time you have possession, but taking playmakers off the field to add that heft that you need to generate push in those short yard situations um, hasn't quite panned out the way that I think Ryan Day and Brian Hartline have had envisioned it going into the regular season. Uh, but I do see why it is valuable. I think you saw the touchdown to Will Kexmerick yesterday. I
Yeah, I
butchered
was just thinking about that.
where you line up in that formation. Wisconsin sold out on the run, so there are
Yep.
things that you can do out of those formations that aren't just trying to generate enough push to score or to get a short yardage first down or something like that. But I think there is a lot left to be desired from what we've seen out of those formations.
Yeah, I do agree with the sentiment of like, why take a guy like Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate off the field in favor of a tight end, especially when Ryan Day talks so frequently about Smith and Tate's willingness and ability to block on the perimeter. If you want to have those guys in the game and still run the football, that's fine. Just bring them closer to the center in the offensive line and basically use them in the same way you would use a tight end, but you give the defense a threat that those guys are going to route up their corners or their safeties or whoever is tasked with defending them. It gives Ohio State a little bit of versatility that I'm not sure they have when all of those tight ends are on the field. I do think Ohio State's tight end room is as deep and as talented as it has been in a long time, but I don't think that any of their tight ends come close to the impact that Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate have for this offense. So why not use that impact when they're close to the goal line or even when they get inside the 20-yard line? Ohio State's red zone offense has been an area of weakness to this point in the season. And it seems like they tend to lean in the direction of running the football in those areas and trying to get in manageable situations in second and third down. But leaning on those wide receivers that are so talented and give you the production that they do, I think that Ohio State would be it would be beneficial for them to continue leaning on them in those situations. There is a question in our YouTube chat from Joe Rabel about Ohio State and other Big Ten teams not really getting the credit that they deserve this season, the media attention. There's also one question about that in our forum that's talking about how deep the SEC is compared to the Big Ten. This is from OSU Bias in our forum, which says, whether you agree with it or not, it's clear the Buckeyes don't play anyone top 15 for the rest of the season. That feels like a recipe for getting a little sloppy and putting it in cruise control. Can Day prevent this team from looking like last year's Oregon team at the end of the year? Because the rest of this Big Ten at the top, at least, is challenging for them for that spot in the Big Ten title game. Do you think that Day can prevent his team from, kind of succumbing to the outside noise and some of the distractions that might be coming around this team as that media attention continues to increase?
Yeah, I think this isn't really new to Ryan Day. We've seen kind of these stretches from previous teams where you might not be playing the best opponents, but you're just still focused on kind of the ultimate goal. As for the media attention, I think I always go back to the Nick Saban rat poison thing. I just think it's so funny where
Yeah.
it's either it's negative or positive. Either way, it's poison. It's gonna get to you. And I think this kind of goes back maybe a little bit back to our conversation about Jeremiah Smith and his declaration that the 2025 team was better than the 2024 team. You could say that was kind of a rat poison type comment a little bit. Um, but in terms of media recognition, I don't think that necessarily impacts kind of how Ryan Day approaches things, how the team approaches things. Do I think the Big Ten doesn't get the recognition it deserves? I think in some areas, yes, but I think in some areas, sometimes it's right. So I think the Big Ten is not quite as deep as it's been in previous years this season. I think you're looking at really three teams at the top, and then Michigan and Nebraska, who are kind of middle of the road teams, but are solid. Um, so I think you're looking at a situation where it's just kind of ignoring the noise, taking care of business, doing what you need to do to make sure that you don't get complacent. I think that's kind of the big thing going forward with this team is that like we've mentioned, the opponents going forward aren't that great. It's just about kind of keeping your mind trained to dealing with the stretch run and dealing with kind of getting ready for the playoffs and Michigan, obviously, at the end of the regular season.
When Nick Saban had those comments, I think it was 2 weeks ago now at this point, about the depth of the SEC compared to the depth of the Big Ten. I wrote about it in the school session, and my take on it remains the same. You can have your depth. The
Right.
Big Ten will gladly take its back-to-back national championships. If you want to put an asterisk on Michigan's championship, by all means, do it. You know, your life, your opinion, whatever you want to do. But as the record books will reflect, Michigan won the championship in 2023. Ohio State won the national championship in 2024. The Big Ten has the two best teams in college football right now, in the AP poll and the coaches poll, making them the favorites to win the national championship again this year. So there is potential, perhaps even a likelihood, that the Big Ten will be the winners of 3 consecutive college football national championships. So depth doesn't really concern me in terms of a conference. Does Ohio State benefit from having an easier path to the national championship than some of the SEC teams currently in the top 5 and the top 10? Sure, probably. They don't have to apologize for it, though. It's not their fault that there are teams in the Big Ten Conference who haven't met the standard that they should meet. Every one of these Big Ten schools is getting a fat check from the Big Ten Conference because of these media rights deals. And you're seeing it play out right now with Indiana, with Kurt Signetti capitalizing on the money that Indiana has coming in, both for the program and for himself, now being the third highest paid coach in college football. But you're also seeing him maximize those resources in making Indiana, of all teams, a contender. If Indiana can do it, every other team in the Big Ten can become a national championship contender if it wanted to, if it had the right coach, if it had the right personnel, and it took advantage of the money that is coming in year after year from these Big Ten media rights deals. And I think that Ohio State does not need to apologize for those schools not producing at the level that they should, and the levels that they could with the Big Ten money that's coming in. Let's go one last question here on the way out. Ohio State has a bye week next season, or excuse me, next week. They will have a bye week next season as well, I'm sure of it. But next week they have a bye week. And there are some questions about some of the concerns maybe that have popped up this year for Ohio State through 7 games, particularly with the running backs making defenders miss, with some of the blocking schemes and maybe some of the personnel that Ohio State is using. We talked a little bit about the personnel with the tight ends, but young running backs, blocking schemes, potentially some roster things. What do you expect the coaches to do during this bye week to maybe alleviate some of those concerns or fix some of those issues? Let's start with the running backs, and then we'll break it down kind of piece by piece. Are we seeing enough out of the running back room? Who do we really want to see emerge as those front runners coming out of the bye week might be a better question.
Yeah, I think the good thing about the running back room, and I think it's kind of maybe been brushed over a little bit, is the versatility. You know, you have a CJ Donaldson, you can use him as a bruiser. You need him in short yardage situations, throw him in there. I think Bo Jackson is a phenomenal athlete. I think he's kind of the guy that you want in on maybe first and second down. If you need to get some chunk yardage in the running game, I think he's the guy you look at. I really liked what we saw flashes wise out of Isaiah West yesterday as well.
Yeah, he looked great.
He looked really good. And I think that there's maybe there's a formula to it with those 3 guys. And obviously leaving out James Peoples as well. I think there's just a formula to these guys that they just need to figure out a little bit. I feel like we see at times maybe too much CJ Donaldson on first down. We see too much of an intention on maybe getting certain guys enough carries. I think at some point you need to have that tough conversation of, hey, we need to limit your production to, you're going to be like a red zone back. You're going to be a short yardage back. I think there needs to be some sort of hierarchy, maybe a little bit in the running back room. Because I think right now they're still trying to kind of get guys their carries. I think you're still kind of seeing that in the box score as well. So I think establishing a hierarchy, kind of playing situational football with the running backs, would do wonders for kind of the running game. But I still think there are the issues in the running games go far beyond that, and I'm sure we'll chat about that.
Yeah, I think what you saw, at least against Wisconsin, was an Ohio State running back room that is going to lean on Bo Jackson and Isaiah West,
Yeah.
which is kind of surprising. Bo Jackson had just 10 carries for 26 yards against Wisconsin. Isaiah West was Ohio State's top performer out of the backfield with 9 carries for 55 yards. CJ Donaldson only carried the ball twice for 2 yards. And then James Peoples didn't record a carry against the Badgers. He did have a reception, 1 catch for 5 yards. But you're seeing a pretty clear split there. Whether or not we see that when Ohio State faces Penn State coming out of the bye week is still to be determined. But I do think that you're seeing some flash and some potential from Isaiah West that makes for an intriguing duo potentially between him and Bo Jackson, two freshmen this season, and not necessarily the two guys that you would have picked to be the front runners in the running back room to this point in the season. Talk quickly about the blocking scheme for Ohio State. If I can adjust that question a little bit, I would say going into the bye week, my number one concern for Ohio State, period, point blank, is Tegra Shabola at right guard.
Yeah.
I think his performance this season has been frustrating if you're the Ohio State coaches, considering he's now in his second consecutive year as a starter at that position, and it doesn't seem like he's made many strides to improve. I would be curious to see if Ohio State, coming out of the bye week, experiments with some more substantial positioning with where they put Tegra on the depth chart. Is he still going to be the starter? Do they maybe put in somebody at that right guard spot like an Ethan Onyanwa, who transferred in from Rice and hasn't really made much of an impact? Josh Padilla is somebody they've explored putting into the different position groups. Could they look at even somebody else at that spot? That's kind of been my concern. I don't mean to be too harsh to Tegra, but I do think that when you watch some of the film of Ohio State's offensive line breakdowns, he's typically at the forefront. So I would be curious to see what Ohio State does coming out of the bye. That's where I'm looking at in terms of scheme. I don't know if you have any other input on where Ohio State might look to maybe expand some of their run game options or what that depth chart might look like up front.
I would agree with that. I think you saw yesterday just too many miscues from Tegra, and obviously that's been kind of a trend. And it's kind of not even just maybe getting beat on some plays. He had some penalties and some discipline. There's some football discipline things there where that just need to be cleaned up. And like you said, as a second-year starter, I think did he have one or two false starts yesterday? I know he had at least one. It's just something that needs to be cleaned up from a guy that has started in however many games that he has, probably around 20 plus games that he has started. I don't know where you go with that. I think you saw some encouraging things out of Josh Padilla yesterday, like you mentioned. But I think one of the things that I've been seeing too, in terms of scheme in the running game, I feel like there hasn't been enough creativity in some of their blocking schemes. I think there's a lot of good on good, which you need, but I think at times there needs to be more movement with the offensive lineman. There needs to be more usage of the tight ends and just I think there has been, and I know that Ryan Day and Brian Hartline are still keeping their cards close to their chest right now and keeping them close to the vest right now. But I think there are some things that are left to be desired in kind of how they've drawn up some blocking schemes in their running game. It's just not enough misdirection, not enough. It just feels like you kind of know where they're going before the play at times. I don't know if that's something that I have just felt on my own, but it's one of those things that I feel like they haven't exactly disguised what they're doing in the run game well enough right now.
It does seem that way. I remember always kind of having a laugh, whether it was you or with, when we worked at BSB, or whether it was my early times at 11 Warriors when Kevin Wilson was the offensive coordinator. And whenever Ohio State would audible into a pistol formation, you knew that ball was being handed off to the right of the quarterback, and it was a slant 18 bouncing it outside. And it does seem like Ohio State does have some tells in the run game, in particular with CJ Donaldson being in the game. It does kind of seem like that's the automatic tell that Ohio State's probably going to run the ball. But in addition to some of the formations they might be running with multiple tight ends, I do agree I would like to see a little bit more creativity from Ohio State in that area. I kind of wondered, and maybe this is giving Ryan Day and Brian Hartline too much credit, if Ohio State has been keeping the scheme very vanilla for the purposes of just continuing to hammer down the fundamentals in that area of the run game. If you can hammer down those fundamentals later in the year, are you able to expand in different ways? You'd certainly like for them to show sort of an efficiency with some of those mixed in play calls and some of those blocking schemes. But to this point, we haven't seen it. And maybe they need another bye week to kind of work some things into the playbook and kind of look to ways for exploiting a defense that gives them some opportunity to be more explosive in the run game. Will Kazmarek said last week that Ohio State's like a block away from really breaking off one of those big runs, but we really haven't seen it yet this season from the Buckeyes. Maybe Bo Jackson has a handful, but it was against like Grambling State and Ohio. Like it hasn't really happened against a Power 5 or Power 4 opponent that has some bigger and some stronger dudes up front. But yes, those are going to be some of the things that Ohio State's going to work in toward during the bye week. But they go into the bye week, the number one team in the nation at 7-0. They play Penn State the following week. Not sure what our plans are going to be next week for 11 Warriors Live. Once we figure those out, I'll let you guys know, our audience. Thank you, as always, for listening. Thank you, Jack, for appearing in a guest spot for Dan and Andy. They're traveling home from Madison right now. Safe travels to them. And I just want to give another shout out to our sponsor, First Bank of Central Ohio. It is the official bank of 11 Warriors. Visit them at fbcentralohio.com. Best of the rest of the day to you, Jack, and to our audience. If you're watching an NFL team, I hope it is not the Browns, because we're probably going to be really sad. If you're a Patriots fan like Jack, maybe it'll be a more exciting day.
Yeah.
But yes, have a great rest of your weekend, and we will be keeping you up to date with Ohio State football coverage at 11warriors.com. And we'll talk to you soon.